Yeah, guys, let us know if you can hear us. So I already know about my presentation, so I don't want to hear myself. So,
Yes, we can hear you.
all right, fantastic. All right, we'll do that again. That was a practice run, so we're just trying to make sure you guys are paying attention and not just watching TV while it's the screen's on. Yeah. All right. Is that better? One more. There. Is that better? Okay. All right. Let's try it again. So I'm Scott McDaniel. I'm the executive director of Susquehannock Wildlife Society, and we are a 501c3 nonprofit based in Harford County, and our focus is on the Susquehanna River Basin and the ecosystem surrounding that. So that kind of involves Harford County, Cecil County, Lower Pennsylvania, that ecosystem there above the Chesapeake Bay. So we intentionally do not focus on the bay itself because there's a lot of great groups doing that already. And we felt that the Susquehanna River and those tributaries that go into it had a really an importance that was kind of overlooked by a lot of people. A lot of people just drive over the river heading east and don't get down to know it and don't get to know some of the ecosystem there. But also, we live in the area, so we felt that it's our own backyard, and it was really important to make sure our community understood all the rare, important, misunderstood, declining things that we had living right around us, and then things, of course, we could do to help make those things better and help ensure that there are those things for our future generations to enjoy. So plants and animals, we do focus on things like pawpaws, meadows, things like that. It all goes together. I mean, plants and animals are wildlife technically. So so we ended up doing both. I didn't start off doing things with plants, and I quickly had to sharpen my botany skills a lot as time went on, because without the plants, you don't have the animals, and a lot of times you need the plants to find the animals and create the habitat that they need. So all those things go together. So really conservation is our main focus, but we do that through research, rescue, and education. So just a little bit quick about us. So research, what we're talking about today, but some of the projects that we work on are the reptiles and amphibians we'll talk about, but we also are working on conservation for the Maryland, Baltimore checker spot butterfly, or Maryland state insect. We'll hopefully be doing a talk about that coming up soon here. But also like trail camera projects, learning about the biodiversity of different areas and ecosystems around the region that we focus on. In Copperheads. So also education. So we do a lot of kind of PSAs and things for the public to understand, like don't kill snakes. They're important for the ecosystem. How to help turtles by helping them cross the road in the direction they're heading towards. Learning about vernal pools. Keeping wildlife wild, not taking wildlife out of the wild to become pets, things like that. Part of our messaging that we do over the years since we were founded in 2011. So one of the key pieces of what we do is rescue. So we actually get calls. People find injured, orphaned wildlife. They'll call us. We'll come out. We'll actually help capture things like eagles, vultures, owls, snapping turtles, snakes, things like that. Anything that gets injured and needs help. We've cut copperheads out of that plastic erosion netting stuff. That's terrible. We've had eagles with broken wings that we've had to paddle out onto an island in Susquehanna to rescue. We don't do any of the medical care. We take it to our veterinarian or rehabilitation partners, and there's some really great ones around that we work with, and get them the care that they need, and hopefully get them back into the wild afterwards. So that's something we do. We'd help the best we can. You know, it's a lot of work, and there's a lot of partners that we rely on heavily, and wonderful volunteers that do that work for us. Conservation, all the things that are declining or things that we just haven't seen in a long time, or things we don't know much about in our region. Things like the gray fox, they're very common in other parts of the state, but in Harford County, there's just not many there. We have very few records. So things like that are interesting to us, as well as things like the Maryland darter, which could be the rarest fish in the world, was only found in Harford County and nowhere else in the world. Hasn't been seen since the late 80s. Very interesting species. It's right in our own backyard. We want people to know about that so it doesn't happen again to things like log perch and other stream fish. And then the Wildlife Center. So we're building a Wildlife Center in Darlington. It's not open to the public yet, but we have had some events there periodically that we'll advertise so people can come out and kind of get a preview and see what we're working on. We have 20 acres at the site, And we are building all sorts of habitat restorations, demonstrations of how to do different things in your own backyard, like meadows, pollinator gardens, vernal pools. We have outdoor barn classroom, inside classroom. We're gonna be doing a master naturalist program there this winter. And we're doing a native fruit orchard with pawpaws and persimmons, lots of cool things like that, nest boxes, all kinds. So it's gonna be a really cool place. We're really excited about all these little things that we were able to do and try out and experiment with there. We have a stargazing wildlife viewing platform. It's going to be part of a hawk watch effort down the road, as well as our exhibits in our center. And that's what we're working on right now so that we can open hopefully sometime in the spring of next year. We're trying to finally do this thing and open. The pandemic set us back a little bit, as it has with everyone, but we're trying to get that rolling so that here's some of our mock-ups of some exhibits we're going to have. They're going to be very ecosystem focused, talking about all of our rare, misunderstood, important connections to different ecosystems that are all around the Susquehanna, from snake dens to meadows, fen wetlands, small creeks, successional areas, Susquehanna River itself, and then all the wildlife that kind of interacts with that. So some live animals will be on exhibit, some models and things like that will be there too. So really excited for that phase to come up. So now talking about our research, what we're here to talk about tonight specifically. So where we kind of started off was we're assisting other organizations in their research. We did the MARA project with the Natural History Society and DNR years ago, and that's what kind of got us started into this field of doing research and organizing research on a kind of a landscape scale. And with that, we started looking for these rarer things, and we started helping out with these projects where people needed help. So we started working with Towson University, Maryland DNR, and others to go out and help them with some of their projects that they were doing. And just my own background, I grew up loving turtles, spending lots of time with turtles, looking for turtles. So it came very natural to me that turtles would kind of be part of a focus. And a lot of the people in our group also very focused on turtles and love turtles. And they're one of our most kind of rare and declining as a species. And in whole, turtles probably are getting hit somewhat the most as far as some of our larger wildlife species outside of insects. So some of the threats to turtles that kind of tie them all together in a lot of ways is that they get injured, they take things like fish hooks and eat them. You have those sorts of injuries, but you also have road mortality. They get hit on roads all the time. I'm sure you guys have seen turtles on the road you've had to rescue and help with. They also have lots of habitat destruction and fragmentation. So their forests and wetlands and streams have been degraded, filled in, sedimented, ditched, all sorts of things, and forests cut down and things built there. So turtles have that going on, but then there's also the collection for the pet trade. So people actually take turtles out of the wild. They make them as pets. Some people think that they're saving them by bringing them into an aquarium, whereas once they're in an aquarium, they're essentially dead to the ecosystem. They can't breed anymore. They can't have more turtles. They can't be food for something else. They're in a tank. Unless it's being done for a scientific research project where they're being bred or some sort of head starting program. Once they become captive, they're not really doing a whole lot for the ecosystem, as well as things like nest predators. So we have a lot of subsidized mammal predators now in the landscape. So foxes and raccoons, feral cats, and skunks, things like that are some of the biggest nest predators for turtles. So they'll actually find their eggs, they'll teach their young how to find these eggs, and they'll go through and just, in some cases, wipe out entire nesting beaches worth of eggs in some cases. So it's a big problem. And when you have a lot of these mammal predators doing really well, and they're omnivores, and they're really good at surviving, and they're really good at surviving around people, they don't have a ton of threats. They don't have any predators above them in most cases, maybe besides coyotes to some extent here, but not much else. So they thrive, and turtles take a long time to reach maturity, to breed, and they only lay so many eggs a year, and they're getting eaten, in one sitting by some of these predators. It's a big problem for us. So, and there's also things like disease like ranavirus. So we've had to work a lot around that, where we have to disinfect our equipment and our boots every time we go out with a bleach solution to make sure we're not tracking these viruses from one wetland to another, for instance, or stream, because a lot of turtles are dropping off from these things. They are getting ranavirus, especially box turtles. and it's affecting some of our amphibian species, but also things like box turtles. So that's a lot of, I know it's very kind of doom and gloom, but there's also a lot of good things going on to try to understand them and hopefully bring them back and kind of manage their habitat so that we can do more with them and see them into the future. So Maryland DNR does a lot of work with bog turtles. They are our smallest turtle in North America, one of the smallest turtles in the world, and they have become exceedingly rare. They're federally threatened species, and they live in 4 counties here in Maryland. I know Scott Smith has come in and talked about them before. We work closely with Scott, and so they're looking at all sorts of things that I'm not going to get into specifics since it's not our project directly, but we do help out with it. We always love a day in the fen, so to speak, which is usually digging around in 2 foot of mud, getting cut up by grass, and baking in the heat while crawling on our hands and knees, and it's a great time looking for these amazing little turtles. So, but what's happened to our landscape is we've had contractions of a lot of these ranges of these species. There's a lot of things that have changed. Grazing animals have disappeared for the most part. Cattle somewhat have filled that in over the years, and keeping some of these landscapes open. Turtles need these sunny, open wetlands, and we lost bison and elk here. And a lot of changes like that have occurred that cause our wetlands to start to disappear over time, as well as ditching and turning them into farm ponds and just filling them in, and then reforestation and has happened a lot, where a lot of wetlands have become maple swamps and become shaded, where the turtles can no longer live there, and also dried out by even the natural processes like that. So what happens in those cases, though, the DNR will have us come out and help, but and some other volunteers, but we go out and actually we'll cut back even things like cattail, like these very kind of aggressive plants that, even if they're native, may overtake a wetland and fill them in, make it really hard for the turtles to move through them, and we'll push out some of the other plants that they prefer. So we'll actually go in and cut them out. I mean, it's as simple as that. It's not complicated, but we'll actually keep back woody vegetation like maples that start growing, and even things like alder and native plants that will overtake some of these wetlands. So it's important to do that. So there's a lot of work, a lot of grit, and that kind of sweat equity that goes into wildlife management. So then we also have helped out Towson University, and I believe you've had folks talk about this project before too. But the northern map turtle in Maryland is a state endangered species. It's not rare across the United States, but in Maryland, we're at the edge of its range, and there's the Conowingo Dam, and there's some other issues going on with the water levels and basking and things like that. So Towson University has been working on that project for some time, and we help out with that whenever we can. It's a really fascinating species that we won't get into tonight, but they're pretty awesome. So one of our kind of keystone initial projects that we started with, is everybody still hearing me okay before I go any further? I want to make sure if I need to make any adjustments while I take a drink of water. It's really hard to tell.
I can
Okay.
hear you.
As long as you can hear me, thank you. Okay, so our spotted turtle project, this one kind of came out because we had some populations of spotted turtles we knew about. We'd found them before during the Mara project in particular. We went out and we started finding them in places, and they're pretty rare across the landscape. They're not an endangered species here in Maryland. We say that, they're on the red list, they're globally threatened. There's a lot of threats to these species, but here in Maryland, they're protected from collection. You can't take them out of the wild as pets, but they're not an endangered species. They're not a threatened species. And the thing with them is that they have disappeared across lots of places. They seem to be fairly rare in the Piedmont, but there's places in the coastal plain where they're pretty plentiful. So it's one of those things that's kind of tough because they are declining in places. There's a lot of places they probably used to be that they aren't, where the habitat's gone, but there's other places where there's still a lot of them. So that's a really hard thing to balance out when you're trying to figure out if a species should be listed and it really is declining across the landscape, or if it's just these isolated pockets where everything's kind of disappearing. So that's part of what we're trying to figure out is if a species does seem to be plentiful, does that mean it's safe and secure? And that's a big question, because a lot of places we go and we have, I want to say it's a feeling, right? you go a place where every time I go here, I see the species. That means they're doing okay because they're here. And I find maybe a lot of them, maybe they're doing great, but is it slowly declining in the background? Are we losing it before our eyes? But because we can always find them, it doesn't seem that we are. So that's kind of what precipitated this project. And we have those other things like the nest predators, poaching, and all that stuff as well going on with the species. They're tiny, they're really beautiful. They have these awesome little yellow spots on them. They're adorable, so that makes them very valuable to people in the pet trade. There are wonderful captive breeders that do it legally. They have permits. They do it the right way. If you really want one of these species, you can buy something from a reputable breeder. We have no issue with that as an organization. We think that's great. If you want to enjoy these animals and you take care of them the right way and you give them proper enclosures with the right things that they need of food and lighting and water quality, go for it. But just, don't take these things out of the wild. Oh yeah, great question. So, yep, let me show you their habitat. So, so their habitat, this turtle, one of the key features of this species is that it uses shallow wetlands. And shallow wetlands can be tidal marshes. They'll even find them in some brackish areas, vernal pools, and these kind of swampy areas. So they'll live in, I find them in cypress swamps in places where there's cypress. We find, down south especially, and then lots of vernal pools in our area. That's where we'll usually find them, which, if you think about it, they're very similar habitats. You have shallow water, muddy bottom, little hummocks and things for them to get up and bask on. They're small. They don't have to fight currents. And the same with kind of the brackish marshes. They can go out into the marsh. They can move in the shallow water. And they can hide from things. They can lay their eggs on the banks, on the shore, in the dirt and those sorts of things. So our population study was kind of founded on the fact that we actually had a site that had been studied years before. So in the 80s to the early 90s, there was a study done at the site that we found some turtles. So we said, wouldn't it be interesting to go back and check on them now, here, 30 years later? You don't get to do that much. A lot of projects, either never didn't happen back when they were still a lot of something there. People said, well, there's a lot of them here. Why are we going to research them, right? And a lot of times you just don't have the data. They were in a binder somewhere. Someone passed away or lost it or quit it, were at a university and they left or they graduated, all those sorts of things. And the data just dissipates in some basement somewhere and never gets found. Well, in this case, we're really lucky that the original researcher had actually kept those documents, very meticulous records, and was willing to partner with us and pass them on so we could compare the population from then to now and note the changes in the wetlands. Note, we know there had been some poaching on the site at one time years ago, like they had found some traps and things that were not supposed to be there. They weren't part of a research project. So we know the quality of the habitat had lowered, but the really interesting thing was that this site in particular was on protected land. So obviously we don't talk about where it was specifically because of poaching concerns, but the land was protected. So the development had already occurred around this area. So what was left where the turtles were still there was protected. So would not be developed, would not be altered in any sort of major way. There's a road that is there, but other than that, the development is on the fringes of the habitat. So keep going with that. So the objectives of this project, and some of this stuff is not from me. So our lead researcher, Hunter Howell, who is in Miami right now, finishing his PhD. He published some of our work. Sorry for that. So he published work on this project, and I'm just grabbing some of that to talk about tonight for us. But he did the analysis, and pretty much what he did was he went out and found turtles and would mark them and then recapture them to try to get a good idea of how accurate our numbers for the population are. So the more times you recapture a turtle, the more certain you can be that it's with your demographics and with your estimates of the population. Because if you keep finding new turtles all the time, you say, well, this population could be way bigger because I'm not finding all the turtles that are here. After a certain period of time, if you keep finding the same turtles over and over and over again, you know that your methods are working, that you're finding turtles, but you're also not finding many more new turtles. So you start to be able to plug all these things into into some formulas that will tell you, how accurate your population estimate might be. I do not do any of that sort of stuff. That is not my wheelhouse, but I do enjoy seeing the results of it. So we went out for multiple years and we did these mark recapture projects. So, and you don't need to know that really, but you can read the papers and I'll give you that at the end if you want to look more into these things that Hunter did and his team. But like I said, we used data collected from the late 80s, early 90s. So we had historic estimates. We found a female that was originally marked in 88 as an adult, found her again. So we know a lot of data from that. So we have a turtle that we can say, then, we know she's relatively this old. We know she was able to survive. Here's her size, all these sorts of things. We can get a lot of data out of that. And that's Richard Laguerre down there at the bottom, walking through the wetland. He was the original researcher that worked with us on this project. And of course, we followed a lot of the same procedures. That way we could compare the data and the data was intact between our two projects. So we had the vernal pool sites separated into two different sections, north and south, and there's different size wetlands, 1 to 2 acre wetlands. They're nice size vernal pools system. And unfortunately, what we found and was really interesting about this, and you can see the relative confidence levels we could have based on what we found, the percentages. So, we could estimate, back then they found 225 turtles using the same methods. We found 104. So we recorded a 49% decline in this population, and this is on protected land. That's troubling, right? That's a big deal because normally you think of, okay, we go to a site and there's nothing left. We only find a few individuals, and that's a site that has lost something. Something happened and they're gone. We also saw a change in age class. So we saw a lot of older individuals, not as many juveniles and smaller turtles. So we're not getting this recruitment back into the population. So that's obviously a big issue. Just looking at these steep declines and, we say, why? Why is this happening? So why on a protected land site, it's not being developed anymore. These wetlands aren't being drained. They're not filled in. They're there. The habitat's still there for the most part. So sorry for the graphic image, but road mortality is a big problem. We were finding dead turtles on the road, right? And it's one little small 2-lane road. It's not a big, 10-lane highway or something crazy. It's a little road going through some good habitat. So we started finding some turtles dead. And plugging in the numbers of dead turtles we started finding based on the population we had and a bunch of models that do their thing, and you plug all these things in, we started figuring out that there would, over the next 140 years, which is a long time, but if nothing changes and things are going as they are today and the habitat's intact and we have these just couple of turtles getting killed on the road each year, and those are just the ones we could find, there's all these other things going on there too, this population would all but disappear in that amount of time, which is pretty startling. And we got this actually published in the Journal of Herpetology because that is an interesting thing to see, because normally we don't plug into a population that is, we're able to see that decline while there's still a lot of animals there. There used to be more, but we're hitting it that halfway point. Usually we get it when there's just a little bit left and we're just finding a few, or they're not there anymore. So we found that pretty interesting. So without having to do years of study and cause and effect and see what works and doesn't work, we know the roads are a problem. We don't have to do more research to figure out the roads are a problem. So we did have some work put in where we were able to put in some silt fencing that got donated. So we were able to put in some silt fencing in key spots where we were finding these dead turtles. So at least redirect the turtles back inward so they weren't going to the road. The problem with roads are in areas like this that are very wet is that the roads act as a sunny clearing, right? That's where turtles want to nest, especially females, are going to move out of the darker shaded areas to find nesting habitat that's sunnier. It's also higher ground where they also like to nest. So the road is literally creating, and this happens a lot with terrapins along these coastal areas. The roadways are a little higher to prevent flooding. So you get a lot of terrapins that are attracted to these roadways or nesting right on the shoulders and things like that. So Sure. So that's part one. Yeah. Well, and the tunnels that is going on. There's places with bog turtles where they're doing tunnels under roads and they're funneling them so they can, and that's more about them just wanting to go on the other side because they're trying to find mates or trying to find more food or just moving around. And the roads are just bisecting. It is. It is simple and it's not, it's not foolproof. There's things, ways for them to get out. They can go around it to some degree, but we do have the fence kind of curves in on the sides that kind of redirects them in. But we can't just do that because they're going there for a reason. They're going there for nesting habitat, right? So what we did also was we had an arborist come out and actually cut down and girdle a bunch of trees in the little higher upland areas of these wetlands. So they're going for nesting habitat. So we wanted to create some nesting habitat potentially. And part of what we did know from the historic discussions with folks at this area was that there was more clearings in this forest. So the forest had filled in a lot, which we always think more trees, that's great, right? We want more trees, but when you're a turtle, you only want so many trees, right? Especially a wetland turtle like this. So they needed some sunny areas to really lay their eggs. So what we felt was happening is they were kind of getting overly shaded and kind of choked out where they didn't really have these little sunny spots to nest. So the idea was we had to, we actually killed some trees in key spots, and left them there so woodpeckers could use them, that they weren't just cut and removed out of there, but kill them out so that the canopy would open up. So we wanted to open up the canopy, kill the top branches, and then have these sunnier areas. We will plan on going back. This is a few years ago. We plan on going back and then seeing what difference we might have. Do another population assessment, see if we're getting any recruitment. We're seeing some younger turtles starting to pop up. We're seeing more nesting, and all those sorts of things. So this is very early. We can't make a lot of conclusions about what effect it might have, but we just, we're kind of playing triage at this point, in conservation in a lot of ways. So we can't always say, let's watch this over 10 years and then we'll put up a fence. And then maybe 10 years after that, then we'll clear out some trees and then see what happens. We don't have the time to do that anymore. These are things that are not going to hurt the ecosystem there. We know that what they need, we know the ingredients that they like. So by creating some of those things kind of in the interim, we felt it was a good step forward to try to help this population stay big and start growing again. There's enough turtles there that if we do the right things, we give them the room that they need, that they could recover without declining down that other way. But if we do nothing, and that's one of the things that I had to learn, the hard lesson for me to learn over the years was doing nothing in nature is not really a possibility anymore. We've altered the landscape too much. I used to think, people just get out of the way, preserve the land, fence it off or whatever you got to do, and just say, no one's allowed in here, just walk away and let nature reclaim its own, right? But as I learn more, you start going out and, oh, wow, there's a lot of invasive plants here. We don't do anything about this. They're going to completely overtake everything. Oh, there's no understory anymore because the deer have eaten all the young trees. So now we don't have a new forest that's coming back in after the older, more mature trees. We have invasive insects coming in. We have wetlands that are drying up. We have all these sorts of things. And you have all the climate things. That's a whole nother layer, right? So if we just do nothing and just sit back and try to let nature sort itself out, certainly it will eventually in one way or another. And nature has been doing that for a long time. But because we've influenced everything, we do feel that there is a place for us as humans to go in and try to fix the things that we've caused. I think we need to let nature work how it needs to work, but we also need to be a helping hand and to fix those things that we've exacerbated, across the landscape. So our next species, this is one that we're working on right now, literally like right now, like we're out this week doing this work. And this is the wood turtle. And this is one of my favorite species because they are a semi-aquatic turtle. So whereas the spotted turtle spends most of its time in water and it's very heavily connected to these wetlands, the wood turtle hibernates in streams. It really relies on these clean freshwater streams. But in spring, it'll actually leave the water and go forage into the forest floor like a box turtle mostly does. And they're mostly terrestrial at that point. They will mate in water. They will feed on land and forage on land and hide on land during those warmer months. But right now, for instance, when it starts getting colder, Now they start going back to the creeks. So we find them on the bottom of creeks, hiding in creeks, going into the banks, root tangles, things like that. So they're pretty interesting turtle. But in Harford County, we have these really remnant populations of them. They tend to be more common in Western Maryland and Appalachia and places that are more remote and more pristine places. But in the Piedmont, at least central Maryland, there's these little remnants. Like we find like one turtle here, one turtle there, a few turtles here, a few turtles there, and that's about it until you get out to the mountains. So we found it very interesting that we could try to figure out why that is, if there's a potential to bring them back, to fix whatever happened to them, and just understand more about them. So what we do is we go out and we look for turtles, essentially. It's a little more complicated than that, but we really try hard. We find turtles, and then when we do, we mark them. We give each one its own marking, and then we weigh them. We measure them all over and get all those stats and record a bunch of data. And then what we're working on now is actually to document the population size, the age classes, and the sex ratios. Harford County, we're finding a lot of males right now, which is troubling because you need females to lay eggs, of course. So find a lot of older males. But with that, we're also working with the state of Maryland, who's doing this project kind of across the state, and we help them out as well. And one thing that they're working on is actually a eDNA sampling. So this is called environmental DNA. And we'll talk about this with our Hellbender project as well briefly, but what they're doing is essentially taking water samples of these streams. So either ones where we're also doing surveys of turtles, where we're actually finding turtles. So that way we know if we get a DNA hit on these samples that we also found turtles in the creek, we're confirming the effectiveness of this technology. But we also sample creeks that we are not able to sample, either we don't have access, or maybe there's just one record there, we don't have time, that sort of thing. So the benefit of this technology is that you can sample water without having to spend hours looking for turtles that might be underwater, under roots, hiding. They're really hard to find, right? Really deep water, perhaps, or it's winter, and they're hiding, and kind of in brumation, which is their hibernation for the winter. So this technology essentially has this little filter that comes in a package sealed. Yeah, I'll show this to you guys. And it's an enclosed filter that attaches to a series of hoses. And this is something that's not touched by anyone when it comes out of the package. And this attaches to a hose, and it goes through a glorified pump that has some data on it. But it pretty much dips into the water, and there's 3 of these at once, and it'll actually suck the water up through here. There's a special filter housed inside of here that will hold the DNA of this turtle if it's there. And then the water pumps through, and it's all measured at a certain level of water, certain liters of water each time. This is put into a bag, and it's sent off to a lab. And in the lab, they're actually able to, they know exactly what the wood turtle DNA looks like, and they're able to see if that filter has it. And there's some future ability potentially to see if there's a lot of turtles maybe in the system, if there's just tiny bits and fragments, which might lead us to think that there's not many left in the system. Maybe they're further away. There's all sorts of things. So there's a lot being studied with this right now, but there's a lot of potential for this as time goes on, especially for rare species, because you could go in and without having to tear up a site, without having to spend a lot of time, without having a lot of people there, and sample just water and say, oh yes, something is here. And that allows us to know whether we should spend more time. Or you say, you know what, we're not getting any DNA, species does not appear to be here anymore, we're not getting it in the stream, let's move on to another site. It's all about the amount of hours, funding, all the sorts of things that we have to focus our energy in places with the most returns and yields. And I'm going to change the slide, but you can keep the camera on for a second because I'm going to show you guys something else while you have the camera on. So we're also doing a telemetry study right now. So we're using this is old school technology, but it works really well. It's pretty amazing. And we've done it with DNR doing bog turtle projects too, but we're actually putting radio transmitters on our Harford County turtles that we're finding. And what we're doing is, it's just a little beep. Each one has its own little signal, its own little code. We type it in here. And this is not digital. This is old school, um, it's like an old cassette player. So, we listen for the beeps, and as you get closer, it gets louder. I mean, it's as simple as that. It takes a little more finesse, but, and with this big antenna that a lot of you maybe used to have on your roof back in the day, but we go around looking for the beep. So we are able to go and find these turtles after we tag them and put these transmitters on them, and the battery lasts maybe 6 months. So for right now, the ones we're putting transmitters on, we'll be able to figure out where do they hibernate. We'll go out throughout the winter and we can find them, okay, under this tree that these roots that go into the creek, we know the turtle's here all winter. So that means in spring, we know where to find that turtle, right? We also know their movements. We went out last week. We had a turtle that we had tagged just 3 or 4 days before. It made a huge movement downstream, which we did not expect at all at this time of year. Usually they start kind of hanging around their hibernacula, which is where they go for the winter to hide out, and sometimes in big numbers. But this turtle had gone way downstream, so it was probably a half mile downstream in just a couple days. And we're like, okay, now is it going to go back up to where we found it a couple days before that, or is it going to stay down there? We don't know. But those are the sorts of things we learn, and we learn about habitat usage and those sorts of things. So it's a pretty cool technology. We walk the streams, and we're able to find our turtles again, and we're able to see if they're doing well, if they're still alive. We're able to measure them again, see if they have any weight gains. If they're females in the spring, late spring, we'll be able to weigh them and see if they're holding eggs potentially, feel for the eggs under them. And then the ultimate goal for us with this project is to find females that will lay eggs. We find their nests, and then that'll hopefully lead to a head starting program I'll talk about in a second here. So you can go back to the slides if you want. So here's just a picture of us, a couple of the turtles that we have. Transmitters on, they're pretty small, they don't cause them any problem, and they're lightweight, so they're all weighted well under what will affect them in any sort of way. But they work. We're able to find exactly, point this thing right at where the turtle is, and then reach into that spot and literally pull a turtle out. It's pretty cool. It's really, really neat stuff. And there's John Garrison, our research coordinator, digging into a root bank in a stream. Oh yeah, we're walking in waders. Water sometimes dips over top of the waders, and it's pretty cold, as you can imagine right now. But it's fun work, and it's really cool being in their habitat. So one of the things we're working with right now, and the reason we're focusing on Harford County in Maryland with this project, besides the fact it's where we focus on most of our work, is because there are some climate-related concerns with the species. So this is mostly a northern species, a New England and Great Lakes species is where primarily the wood turtle's range is. The furthest south they go is Northern Virginia and West Virginia, and all the populations are pretty much north of there. So, and in Harford County and Central Maryland, we literally are on the edge of the range. Like they don't go any further south really. There's a couple older records, things where they go further south in Maryland, but not much. So there are some, spots where you can just look at the map, and Maryland itself is at the bottom of the range. So what does that mean? So a species that is adapted to colder climates in New England, say the Northeast and the Great Lakes, and a change of a degree or two, so that say the climate's more like Virginia or more like North Carolina. Well, why is that turtle not in North Carolina? Why is that turtle not in Virginia anymore? Why, after all the glacial things that happened, all the changes in climate over the millennia, this turtle has settled into this part of the range, right? So we don't know. And we don't know if it has something to do with they need a certain cold period to have egg laying. We don't know. They seem like they can survive. Like you could have a pet wood turtle in Florida, it wouldn't just die to live in Florida outside. But would it be able to breed? Would it be able to lay eggs properly? Would the young survive? Those sorts of things. Those seem to be the things that matter for the species. And I don't think we really know yet exactly, but there seems to be something there. So my colleague Hunter and his team down at Miami had created some models based on wood turtle range, based on some climate models, and they're looking at habitat suitability based on climate. So will this be immediate? No. but as things maybe shift around, there is potential that the habitat becomes less and less ideal for the species. And then where would it persist? You know, would it persist further north in Canada? Things like that. So that's what we're really interested in. So part of what we're going to do is, you know, survey this population heavily at the edge of the range to see if it just continues to decline. If we do bring more turtles in, you know, if we bring back some turtles, will they survive? Is it a climate issue? Is it just a predation issue? Is it a sedimentation issue? Is it a water quality issue? What is the reason that these turtles are declining in this part of their range? We don't know yet, but that's something we hope to find out. So with the permission of Maryland DNR and our permits, we're hoping to actually track some females and remove some eggs and then head start them to a larger size. That eliminates the predator issue, right? So that makes it where they're not bite-sized little, you know, fox or otter raccoon snacks. We do find otters do remove legs from wood turtles quite a bit, but the predators of nests and things like that seem to be the bigger issue. Are we okay going on a bit? So I know we started a little late, so I want to make sure we're all right. Okay. So baby wood turtles would be really great, right? So in our lab at our wildlife center, we are hoping to raise up some young turtles in a you know, an indoor setting with all the requirements they need. It'll be isolated from any other animals. They'll be verified by veterinarians before they go out into the wild. Working with the Maryland Zoo as well, who's doing some of this work in Western Maryland. So we're trying at an experimental level right now. This has been done in other places in New England, so we're not the first. We will just be following along other research that has been successful in other places. But that is something exciting. That'll be a first time for us. It's the first time of us tracking these animals with radios, and we're going to learn more about them in the next coming years. And we're hoping to do a lot more as time goes on. So it's a really special species, and it really seems like we need to fight for them, and we need to figure out what we did to lose them across a lot of our landscape, and then try to see what we can do before it's too late. So turning a little bit different direction. I will hold this up. I don't think you necessarily need to switch to the camera, but it's up to you. I have a model of a hellbender. It looks just like the picture essentially, so it's up to you guys. But I have a model of a hellbender here, the Eastern Hellbender. It is a up to about 2 foot long salamander that lives in really cold, really clean streams. It is an ancient species that is still found in Maryland, but interestingly used to be found in the Lower Susquehanna region. So we have old records from Harford County, so they came all the way down to that area at one time. Right now, the population still exists in Garrett County, which is in the Ohio drainage, but in the Susquehanna drainage, we have populations that are north of Harrisburg and PA still, but there's this huge gap down the river. So, you know, if you know the river, you know what's in the river below that point. There's a lot going on there, and not a lot of good over the years. A lot of dams, a lot of sedimentation, a lot of deforestation that happened a long time ago, mostly. And then, you know, obviously development things on top of that, and farms and all these things where the soil is just going into these tributaries. But it's a really cool species in that it mostly eats crayfish. A lot of fishermen used to think that they would eat their trout, so a lot of them were killed unnecessarily. A lot of people thought they were venomous, so they were killed for that reason. They're not venomous. They have a lot of crazy names like snot otters and grampus and old lasagna sides, which is one of my favorite ones because they have these weird skin folds on the sides. But I don't recommend eating them because they're, you know, endangered and all. But they are endangered species in Maryland. And they had a bad reputation. They look gross to a lot of people. I think they look awesome. I mean, seeing a salamander that big, and I've seen them in North Carolina, it's really impressive. I mean, to see something that big living in this beautiful, cold, rocky creek or river is really special. And they crawl on the bottom of these really cool little toe pads they use to climb around. And they'll actually use these giant flat rocks. That's what they hide under. And that's part of the reason we've seen declines of them across a lot of places, is at the bottom of these rocks they need to hide under get filled in with sediment. So, and then obviously the pollution, the water gets warm. A lot of places that used to have trout that need that really cold water, I mean, trout as in brook trout or native trout, would also have hellbenders potentially. And those big flat rocks need to be there for them to live under. They'll guard their eggs under those rocks as well as hiding. So in our area, we've seen a lot of our creeks change a lot because of all those things I mentioned earlier. But finding them at this point, if there were only a few, which if we did have any left, that would be the case because they have not been seen in many decades. I don't even remember the last sighting that was actually verified, but I want to say probably the 40s or 50s, maybe earlier. I do have some anecdotal reports. You just never know. Without a photo, people might see a big northern red salamander. A lot of the ones that people say they saw were larvae. They were the young salamanders still had gills. So once you have that, it's probably a red salamander or something else potentially. So, so it's been a long time, but there were these really old records from decades ago. There are places where they're still numerous in some of the national forests along the Appalachians, but if you look at their range, and I don't know how, accurate some of these are, but I think these are the historic records that were there, and you'll see how that's very spotty. And then there's these random places in the Susquehanna, but most of it's to the west in the Ohio drainage, and then down along those mountainous areas. But pretty cool that they were also in Harford, Cecil County, because everywhere else is mostly these pretty vast, huge forestscapes and giant river systems. But their habitat looks like this. So there are hellbenders found in the Susquehanna itself, and like pretty far up New York, and upper PA. But a lot of their habitat are these kind of smaller rivers to larger creeks, these giant rocky bottoms there where they can hide. So once again, our landscape is very different from that. We have things like the Conowingo Dam, holding back a lot of sediment, all the construction of that, all those deforestation that happened over the last 100, 200 years. It looks really nice now. We have some really great state parks and forest areas along the Susquehanna, but it wasn't always like that. All those trees were cut down at some point for the most part. We have a lot of construction. We have a lot of these really sedimented creeks with these really thick piles of soil that's eroded down off the hillsides when they're deforested, and all those sorts of things. So we have a totally different landscape. So could they still survive after all that? And the answer is probably not, knowing what we know about the species. But there were these spaces where some of these creeks still look like they kind of did at one time. There's these hemlock forests, these areas that are still pretty wild. You go to them and you go, you know what, this looks like a hellbender stream. It looks like a place, it looks like you're in West Virginia. But for us to survey all those places was almost impossible. So what we did was, once again, the environmental DNA. That's when we first were introduced to it. So instead of flipping all these rocks, which could, kill the last hellbender in the Lower Susquehanna potentially, or a certain time of year, risk its eggs or something like that. So we went to the eDNA model, which it's looking for all these things in the water that comes from a hellbender, and they have very specific DNA. So if we were able to trap some of the DNA on a filter, we could potentially, get a positive and know that nothing else is going to produce DNA like that. So if you found hellbender DNA in one of these creeks, that there's a hellbender somewhere there, and then we could do a very extensive project from there to try to find them and understand them and learn their genetics, and these populations here have never been studied. So here's some information about who kind of started working with these. Smithsonian led that project years ago now, it feels like 2014, and we helped out with it for several years after that. But our focus was just doing what we could to figure out if this population that was believed to be extirpated, which means like locally extinct, was wiped out. So what we did, this was the old school way of doing it. We didn't have these fancy $10,000 backpacks then. We actually just scooped the water from the stream, and then we went to places we thought looked good, that looked like hellbender places. And then we actually ran the water through a vacuum pump that would pull the water through the filter. And then we would take the filter and put it in ethanol and send it off to a lab. And then they would look for the hellbender DNA fragments. That was the way we did it. And we surveyed a bunch of sites, but we had no evidence of them. So of course, our effort was very limited and small. So we can't say that they weren't there based on our study. But just knowing that a fisherman hasn't found one, we don't have any dead ones that have shown up. We haven't seen one anywhere. The records have been absent for decades. If it's been a few years, of course, things could turn up, but decades of time, and then our effort to sample the places we thought potentially had the best habitat left makes us believe that they are no longer here in this part of the state. Yes. That's a great question. I don't think anyone really knows that answer yet. So he asked, how far away can you pick up the DNA? And I've heard things like it could be 300 feet, but I've also heard that, it could be, I mean, you're talking about a moving stream. So if you have a hellbender that's 300 foot up from where you're sampling, the idea is to sample the spot that looks like where they would be, not just go to a creek and they're like, well, they could be miles upstream and hopefully we'll get something. They're trying to sample places that have their habitat. Same with wood turtles. We try to sample places that are downstream from places where we know that they should be or expect that they would be. That's something that I think is being developed from my understanding, is that they are getting different levels of readings, which might mean there's more turtles, or it could mean that they're closer and the turtle's putting off more DNA. There's things that, so a lot of these samples are being kept so that as the technology gets better, they can potentially even go back and say, all right, now let's look at that with this new technology. And we can say, we can pull out not only the fact that we have a hit saying, oh, there's a wood turtle here somewhere, that there's many wood turtles here, or there's only maybe a few. Now, our sites in Harford County that were sampled already and tested, where we found like one turtle, not that far away, we got very low reading, but we did get a read. So does that correlate? I don't know yet, but they've done a lot with this. Started with, I think, a lot of invasive like fish was how a lot of this started. They wanted to go into a system and say, is that invasive species here, without having to shock and dredge a whole lake. And they say, oh yeah, we're getting hits on this carp or whatever it was. But so that's always the question I ask, because it's, is it a 2,000 feet? We can just go down at the end, or do we need to like, so a lot of these samples will say they want you to take multiple points along a stream, a certain distance apart. And that's why when DNR does it, they're doing 3 samples every time they go, and they're going multiple times. So they're not just sampling on one day. They're sampling, I think it's 3 times a season, for twice. So it's like, I think it's like a lot of samples for one site. So, and then that way if you're getting consistent results, you don't have this anomaly where we had a hit once and then all the other times we didn't get anything. If we're getting them all the time, our quality of our data is a lot stronger, right? So that's a great question. And I don't think, there's people that probably know a lot better than I do about that, but that's what I'm hearing when I ask that question. So yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of predators now. Snakehead's another one. Snakeheads are going up a lot of these creeks pretty far. But they're pretty resilient as far as predators. Otters do eat them. Down in North Carolina, a lot of the biologists I talked to there said that they'll find otter kills sometimes because they can dig them out under rocks. Otters are awesome, but they're incredible predators. All the weasels are, but they're also really good at grabbing a turtle leg and eating it off, and things like that when they're too cold to swim away. And so they do wreak some havoc. But that's part of the balance of nature. But you also, when you're dealing with a rare thing, something else that's now doing pretty well again, you start getting that weird balancing act coming back. But in Garrett County, they have done some work with nest boxes. That's a lot of what's going on now, and also lends the potential for future here. When I say here, I mean the Susquehanna area, because these nest boxes kind of allow you to not only like study the animal and go out and like see the nest a lot easier, because it has this little window that opens up and lets you see the eggs where the adult hellbender, a lot of times the male is guarding the eggs. But you also have it where the entry point's facing downstream. So you're eliminating some of that problem where a giant rock that's laying on the bottom of the stream is just getting filled in by sediment. You're putting these boxes that are facing down. So the idea is that, they do need to be cleared out and things periodically, from what I understand. I've not worked with them myself yet, but just the way that they're set up does allow for a little bit more of an impaired system to allow them to nest in. So the population in Western Maryland is doing really badly too. You have acid mine drainage and all this other stuff going on. A lot of those systems, at least in the past. But they seem like they're hanging on in some spots. Now, I've not worked with them there, but that's what that's my understanding. But in part of Maryland, and at least maybe in the Susquehanna drainage, if we clean up our streams, these stream restoration projects, reforestation projects, all the bay goals that we have and things like that, is it possible that some of these streams get clean enough that we could try a head starting project and work with zoos and bring some hellbenders back? They're doing that in other places. They're successfully doing it in other places where they're either taking eggs from other places. That seems to be the most foolproof way of doing it, but they're also actually breeding them in some places, like out in St. Louis, I believe, zoo. But it's a very extensive operation, but they're able to breed them as well. But even just getting eggs from places where they're more numerous, hatching them in captivity, raising them up to a certain size, putting them into the system, tracking them, seeing how they do, it's possible. So could we see them again in our lifetime? I sure would love to see that. I don't know if it'll happen, but we would love to be a part of that, and that's something we're going to work towards. It's another goal to clean up some of these streams and to push forward. It's not just for the beauty, not just for the numbers for the bay, to get those numbers up for our, our seafood industry and everything else that we enjoy, but and our clean water, which is very important. But bringing back something like this would be a very a tangible and kind of symbolic thing. That's something that really requires that cold, clean water is able to survive again in our water that it couldn't, that it disappeared from. It's pretty cool. So this is the last segment. If I'm still good on time for a few minutes, I'm going to talk about our copperhead research. So this was a little bit of a deviation from other species I've talked about, where we are looking at rare species that were declining or threatened in any way. Copperheads seem to be doing fairly well. I mean, a lot of snakes do have lower numbers for a lot of reasons, but the copperhead, our main focus was not on the fact that they were numerous or not, but it was their behavior. So the copperhead is our only venomous snake in the eastern part of Maryland. So once pretty much east of Frederick, it's our only venomous snake. In Frederick, we get the timber rattlesnake, starts popping up. We used to have in Baltimore County as well, but the timber rattlesnake is pretty much confined to the mountains now in Maryland. So around here, the only venomous snake you have to think about is the eastern copperhead. Now they are a species that is commonly misidentified. People often think that any snake with a pattern is a copperhead, and and a lot of young rat snakes and milk snakes and well, any snake really is misidentified and killed. That is illegal to do in Maryland, even for copperheads. And they're really important in our ecosystem, and we knew that. We know that people hate them because if you get bit by a copperhead, it's going to ruin your day for sure. It's painful. You have to go to the hospital. It's a serious thing, right? But it's easily avoided. Learning to identify snakes. Most bites come from people that are handling them, or accidentally potentially step on or grab a snake, right? And those are the stories that we heard. And we think about all the people that use and enjoy the outdoors and people that are afraid of finding a copperhead. And we're all hikers and things like that. And we always said, how likely would it be if you're hiking down a trail and there's a copperhead sitting on the side of the trail for it to strike at you? They are masters of camouflage. So we wanted to figure out how likely that would be, and are they aggressive, right? That was really the behavior we're looking for. So we like to say, instead of aggressive, that animals are defensive, right? They bite because they're defending themselves. And I tell everybody, anything with a mouth can bite. I tell my son that. He says, will this animal bite? Will this animal bite? Unless it doesn't have mouth parts, like one of these, like a cicada or something, it's not going to bite you. It's going to bite you because it thinks that you're going to hurt it. It's trying to get away. That's mainly the reason animals are going to bite. Dogs bite, some kids bite, right? So, so a snake's not just intrinsically just out to come bite you. It's not just sees a person and wants to bite them, right? So this is something we wanted to put scientific method to, and we knew that there were other research projects involving cottonmouths down south that were done in this sort of way. So we replicated that with copperheads because it hadn't been done before. And it's something that we felt like we knew based on our own experience with copperheads. Just seeing them out in the wild, doing research once again from our project, seeing copperheads around. We had a pretty good sense of what they do when we see them, but we wanted to do it on a wider scale with more animals and figure out. So once again, our main focus was not if a snake would ever bite, but it's if it will bite in a circumstance that is most likely to be how people would encounter them. So you're hiking down a trail and you kick a copperhead that's in the leaves and you know it was there. You're climbing a rock and you tap into a copperhead that was sitting on the rock basking, that sort of thing. We know people get bit. I just have to say that because a lot of people saw our research and they said, well, I know this guy got bit and I heard the news, this person got bit. People get bit by copperheads. It does happen. It is rare, but most of the cases, and I even have a family member who got bitten. He was unrolling a tarp in Georgia and the copper was in the tarp. It couldn't get out, started thrashing, and it just bit his hand. And luckily it was an insignificant bite, didn't have a lot of damage. I think it was mostly a dry bite, but it happens, right? So we hear about a scout camp where a kid steps on a copperhead in a tree and gets bit, those sorts of things. So it does happen, but what we think happens is, it's the amount of pressure put on the animal. Obviously, our project would not harm the animals in any way. So if a person puts their full weight on an animal, will it bite then? Likely, right? But our idea was to lightly put pressure on the animal in a couple different ways and then record what it would do. So first of all, we had to find these darn things, right? So for the few folks here in the room, can you see this copperhead on the screen? Can you find it? I bet you can find it. You got the eagle eyes. Middle right on the crack? No. Yep. Yep, right there. Yep. Yeah, good job. But look how well they blend in, right? So, I mean, pretty impressive. That's what they do. They're ambush hunters, right? They're ambush predators. So they hide. So that not only hides them from predators, but if they're hunting mice or frogs, that allows them to remain hidden. They look just like fallen leaves. I mean, they really do. It's quite amazing. You could walk right by that, never see it, right? I think that was just one. Here, same thing here. You see that one? You say left or right if you see it. Kind of right above the rocks. Yep. And then you see it there, right? So yeah, pretty amazing, right? I mean, that's what they do. They're really good at it, right? So the idea was, we wanted to simulate that and finding them in these places. So we went out, we always would check the temperature to see if there was any difference in, if they would strike, if they were really hot, if they were kind of cold, they just came out, it was a cold morning kind of thing. So we always take temperature reading and then we would walk up and we'd step next to the snake and see what it would do. And then if it didn't do anything, and we record whether it would flee, vibrate its tail, so a lot of snakes will rattle their tails. We think of only rattlesnakes, but rattlesnakes have a built-in rattle, but a lot of snakes will actually vibrate their tail in leaves to create that same kind of buzzing sound as a warning, like, hey, I'm here, don't step on me, or I'll bite you kind of thing. So they will vibrate their tail, or would it strike? Or just do absolutely nothing, just sit there, right? So we did find that we'd step next to the snake or step on it, and it wasn't as conclusive as you would think. A lot of these snakes wouldn't really do anything when we do that. We also would then get to the third step. If they didn't flee at that point or strike, we would reach down with and we do that with a boot that was on a stick, by the way, a boot on a stick, very fancy. And then we would also use a tong with a glove on the end to actually pick up the snake and then see if it would strike the glove. Now, we've heard criticism that, well, it wasn't a real human hand and they can sense temperature. So, therefore, if there was a human hand in that glove, it would have bit, or in that boot. But we would check the outside of, we do temperature readings on these boots. We keep them exposed on our packs so they're getting sun. The temperature of the glove, whether there's a human hand in it or not, and using things like tongs and seeing like our captive snakes and snakes in the wild that will strike an inanimate object even if it's agitated and there's enough pressure on it. You know, that doesn't seem to be that relevant as people might think, especially because if something's going to step on it, you know, an animal, and it could be another, you know, another reptile, for instance, that's the same temperature as the snake that's sitting out in the sun. Would it still strike at that animal? And you know, the outside of your skin versus your internal temperature and things like that. You know, it's not looking to hunt this animal. It's seeing the signature of you know the shape and the movement coming at the snake as well. So we did that across 69 snakes, and we got the study published. It was pretty interesting. Out of those 69 snakes, we only had 2 strike, which is actually less than we expected. We knew we thought it would be low, but that was a lot less than we expected. So, you know, we agitated the snakes in the way, like, you know, we weren't poking at them. If we kept poking at them, like some people do, eventually they'll strike, of course, right? Or if you're hurting the animal, if you put all your weight on the animal, it will probably strike, which we weren't going to do that, of course, because we don't want to hurt them. But you know, you're stepping on them with the boot, which is, this is what you would do, you know, if you're walking down a trail and you step down and go, uh-oh, and you pull back and go, there's a copperhead there. Would it have bitten you then? According to our research, not that likely. That's not saying it wouldn't happen, but it's saying it's not that likely. Not enough to elicit the fear that a lot of people have of these animals, that will, you know, they'll literally throw stones at them or smash them or chop their heads off because they just exist. You know, our point was just that we wanted people to understand that the snake is not out to get you. It does not want to strike you. It is unlikely to strike you if left alone, if you don't mess with them. And just walking past them and not knowing they're there, it's very unlikely that it will try to strike at you. So that's somewhat of just peace of mind for all of us outdoor oriented people that want to be out hiking and being outside. You know, when my kids are outside with me and we're in a place where I know there might be copperheads, rock outcrops along rivers, things like that, I tell them, be careful, there could be snakes here. Let's not climb over rocks that we're not looking at. Don't ever put your hands somewhere that you can't see. You know, there's ways of interacting with these animals in their habitat without eliminating them. We can coexist, right? So, you know, use caution, respect the animal, but just know that, you know, the reason for the fear that a lot of people have of them, you know, if they're around your house, they're around your kids, they're around your pets, we understand. You can get them removed. You can put them off your property in a more suitable place. I also tell a lot of people, if you have a snake in your yard, you don't want to handle it, or if it's something like a copperhead and you don't know what to do with it, you can use a hose. I say hose instead of a hoe. You know, they don't chop their head off. Spray them with a hose. They don't like the water. It'll make them slither away most of the time. You know, or you can take a big trash can, lay it on the side, push them in. I tell people that call to have a snake in their house, you know, throw a drop cloth or a towel or blanket over it, scoop it up, take it outside. You can always call or text us if you have a question on an ID. Hey, what kind of snake is this? Is it venomous or not? We'll tell you the best of our ability. So that sort of thing. So you can read this whole publication. I'll give you the link for that in a second here. We do have some cool merch you guys can check out on our bonfire site. We have some like bog turtle shirts and wood turtle shirts, our turtle barn quilt and logo shirts as well. So check that out, support us. We also take donations, as well as please support the Natural History Society. We can all use help these days, especially all our nonprofits that are doing the work that we're doing. Yeah, here's all of our different handles and various places to see what we do. We do a lot on social media as well. And you can learn, read all our research papers that Hunter has published at researchgate.net /profile/Hunter_Howell. And he's our vice president now, but he was our former research coordinator, but he's led a lot of our research projects, and now John Garrison is leading our research. And we still work with Hunter, of course, with that too, while he's in Florida. But he has some really cool research, multiple papers on spotted turtles. We have our Copperhead project was led by Andy Adams. We're all co-authors on that one. And then we're working on some wood turtle stuff now, and he published some climate models for wood turtles. So we'll be doing more as time goes on, but that's kind of our basic summary of a lot of things that we're working on. Right now, we're going to be carrying the wood turtle project in the next year. and hopefully doing a lot more with that. And we'll be posting about that as time goes on. But I just threw a lot of stuff at you guys. So if you want to ask any questions of anything I talked about, we'll give a couple minutes. If anyone had a question pop up. My pleasure. The Zoomers. Oh, what's up? I can repeat what you said. Oh, can they hear us? Oh, no, they can't hear you from there. In general, I hope they could hear me. I've just been talking for a long time. I appreciate you guys coming out and joining us online and supporting the Natural History Society. So thank you.